Two white cops arrested a 15-year-old black girl, thinking no one would question their actions. What they didn't realize, her father was the last person they wanted to mess with. This story starts with a routine traffic stop, or so it seemed. A young black girl found herself in handcuffs, treated like a criminal for simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But this wasn't just about the arrest. It was about power, prejudice, and a system that had let these officers believe they were untouchable. What the cops didn't know was that this teenager wasn't as alone as they thought. Her father wasn't just any man. He was someone with the power to expose their actions in a way they couldn't have anticipated. By the time the truth was revealed in court, the room fell silent, and the officer's smug confidence turned into something else entirely. What unfolded next will leave you questioning everything. It all started on a quiet evening when a 15-year-old black girl was driving home after visiting a friend. She was a typical teenager, full of dreams and plans, but her life took an unexpected turn when two white police officers pulled her over. Their reason? A vague claim about a broken taillight. However, as the interaction unfolded, it became clear this wasn't about a vehicle violation. It was something much deeper and uglier. From the moment they approached her car, the tension was palpable. The officers didn't ask polite questions or explain the situation calmly. Instead, they demanded she step out of the vehicle with a harshness that seemed unwarranted for such a minor issue. She hesitated, confused and scared, but the officers took her hesitation as defiance. "Step out of the car now," one officer barked, his hand already resting on his holster. The girl, visibly shaken, tried to explain she was just a teenager and had done nothing wrong. But her words only seemed to fuel their aggression. They accused her of resisting and escalated the situation unnecessarily. Before she could process what was happening, the officers pulled her from the car, handcuffed her, and placed her in the back of their patrol car. Witnesses nearby began to gather, some recording the incident on their phones, but the officers didn't seem to care. For the girl, the humiliation was unbearable. She wasn't just being treated unfairly, she was being made an example of, her dignity stripped away in front of strangers. The officers acted as if they had complete authority, convinced their actions would go unchallenged. After all, who would believe a 15-year-old black girl over two white officers? At the station, things got worse. She was interrogated like a criminal, accused of resisting arrest and causing a public disturbance. The officers filed a report, painting her as aggressive and uncooperative. But the reality was far from their version of the story. Her family was notified, and when her father heard the news, his first reaction was disbelief. How could his daughter, a kind, respectful teenager, end up in such a situation? But as the details became clear, his disbelief turned into quiet determination. Behind the scenes, the father began piecing together what had happened. He requested access to the police body cam footage, but his requests were ignored. When he insisted, the officers tried to brush him off, assuming he was just another angry parent. They didn't realize he was the chief of police for a neighboring city, a man with the knowledge and resources to uncover the truth. The challenges didn't stop there. The family faced public scrutiny as the officers' report made its way into local news. The narrative painted the girl as a troublemaker, and while some people supported the family, others sided with the officers, claiming they were just doing their job. The young girl had to face not only the trauma of the arrest, but also the harsh reality of how the world often perceives black individuals in situations like hers. She was constantly asked to relive the incident, both by her family's lawyers and during the media frenzy that followed. Meanwhile, the officers remained confident. They believed their version of the story would hold up in court, as it had for so many others in the past. Their actions weren't a mistake to them, they were routine. This wasn't just a problem for one family, it was a reflection of a larger issue. The girl's arrest highlighted a system where power often goes unchecked, and biases dictate how people are treated. It wasn't just about the two officers or even the town they served. It was about a culture that allowed such behavior to persist without consequences. In court, the officers doubled down on their narrative, portraying themselves as victims of a disrespectful teenager. But as the trial went on, cracks in their story began to appear. Witness testimonies and video evidence from bystanders painted a much different picture, one of two officers abusing their authority against a defenseless girl. The young girl's family faced an uphill battle, but they were determined to prove the truth. Her father, a man who had spent his career upholding the law, couldn't stand by and watch the system fail his daughter. He knew that this case wasn't just about clearing her name, it was about exposing the prejudice and abuse of power that people like her faced every day. This was more than a legal battle. It was a fight for justice, a fight against a system that allowed those in power to act without accountability. And as the evidence began to pile up, it became clear that the truth couldn't be hidden forever. What started as a routine traffic stop was now a case that could change everything. But could justice really be served in a system designed to protect the powerful? That was the question hanging over everyone's head as the trial moved closer to its climax. As the courtroom drama unfolded, the story began to reveal layers of tension and injustice that no one could ignore. It wasn't just about a traffic stop gone wrong, it was about years of systemic issues coming to light in a single, explosive case. The officers entered the courtroom with a smug confidence. They believed they had the upper hand. After all, they'd written their report, carefully crafting a narrative that painted the 15-year-old girl as defiant, aggressive, and out of control. To them, this was routine, a minor situation they could easily justify with their badges and authority. What they didn't expect was the level of scrutiny this case would bring. As the trial began, the prosecution laid out the officers' version of events. According to their story, they had stopped the girl for a broken taillight, and she immediately became confrontational. They claimed she resisted arrest, refused to comply with their orders, and even posed a threat. Their words were rehearsed, their delivery polished. For a moment, it seemed like they had everyone convinced. But then, the defense began to dismantle their story piece by piece. First, the defense attorney presented eyewitness accounts. Several bystanders had been present during the arrest, and their testimonies painted a very different picture. One witness described how the girl had been cooperative, repeatedly asking what she had done wrong. Another spoke of the officer's aggressive tone and unnecessary use of force. These accounts directly contradicted the officer's claims and started to crack the foundation of their story. Next came the video evidence. Cell phone footage recorded by a bystander was played in the courtroom, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. The video showed the officers pulling the girl out of the car with unnecessary force, ignoring her pleas and treating her as if she were a hardened criminal. The footage also captured their harsh words, which carried undertones of racial bias that were impossible to ignore. As the courtroom watched the video, the officers' confident demeanor began to falter. They had no way to refute what was now plain for everyone to see. But the defense wasn't done yet. The girl's father, a man who had stayed quiet until this moment, finally stepped forward. Dressed in his police chief uniform, he commanded the attention of everyone in the room. When he took the stand, the tension was palpable. He began by stating his credentials, a decorated officer with decades of service and an unblemished record. Then, he turned his attention to the case. He revealed that he had requested the body cam footage from the arrest, and after weeks of delays, he finally obtained it. The defense played the body cam footage next, and it was even more damning than the cell phone video. It showed the officers mocking the girl after placing her in the patrol car, making comments about her appearance and dismissing her tears. It also revealed that they had no real justification for stopping her in the first place. The taillight they claimed was broken was fully functional. The courtroom was silent as the footage played, except for the audible gasps from the audience. The evidence was irrefutable, and the officer's story unraveled further with each passing second. The defense then shifted focus to the larger issue at hand, the systemic bias that had led to this situation. They called on experts who spoke about the history of racial profiling in the police force, providing data that showed how Black individuals were disproportionately targeted in traffic stops and arrests. This wasn't just about two officers, it was about a culture of prejudice that had gone unchecked for far too long. The officers, now visibly shaken, were called to testify. Their earlier confidence was gone, replaced by nervousness as they tried to explain their actions. They stumbled over their words, unable to justify their behavior in the face of overwhelming evidence. Their attempts to defend themselves only made things worse, as their biases became more apparent with every answer. Meanwhile, the girl's family sat in quiet dignity, watching as the truth finally came to light. For the young girl, this wasn't just about clearing her name, it was about reclaiming her sense of self-worth after being humiliated and dehumanized. Her father's presence and unwavering support gave her the strength to face the ordeal head-on. Outside the courtroom, the case had sparked a national conversation. News outlets picked up the story, and it quickly went viral. People across the country debated the implications, with some defending the officers and others calling for systemic change. Protests and rallies were organized in the girl's support, with communities demanding accountability and reform. As the trial continued, it became clear that this wasn't just about one incident, it was a turning point. The officers' actions, once hidden behind their badges, were now exposed for the world to see. The girl's story had become a symbol of resistance against injustice, and her family's fight was inspiring others to stand up and demand change. By the end of the trial, the evidence was undeniable. The officers had abused their power, and their actions were rooted in prejudice. But the case wasn't just about holding them accountable, it was about shining a light on a broken system and starting the process of fixing it. The courtroom drama had revealed the depths of the problem, but it had also shown the power of truth and resilience. This 15-year-old girl and her family had faced unimaginable challenges, but they refused to back down. Their story wasn't just about what had happened to them, it was about what needed to change for everyone. The courtroom was electric with tension as the trial reached its pivotal moment. Every eye was on the girl's father, a man who had remained composed throughout the proceedings. Now, as he took the stand, the weight of the truth he carried was about to come crashing down. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady and commanding, "what happened to my daughter wasn't just an abuse of power. It was a direct reflection of a system that allows individuals to act with impunity, shielded by their authority." His words cut through the air like a knife. The officers sat stiffly at their table, their earlier arrogance replaced with discomfort. They avoided his gaze, knowing that the evidence he was about to present would expose them completely. The court clerk handed him a USB drive containing the body cam footage that had taken weeks to obtain. He inserted it into the computer, and the screen at the front of the courtroom flickered to life. As the video played, the courtroom was plunged into a heavy silence. The footage began with the officers approaching the girl's car, their tone sharp and unnecessarily aggressive. "Step out of the car," one of them barked, his hand resting on his holster. The girl's voice, trembling but polite, responded, "What did I do wrong?" The officer's response? Mockery and intimidation. The video revealed how they escalated the situation, pulling her out of the car and handcuffing her despite her compliance. Then came the part that no one in the room was prepared for once she was in the back of the patrol car. The officers laughed about her tears. "Another one who thinks she's untouchable," one of them sneered. "Maybe this will teach her a lesson." The air in the courtroom grew heavier with each passing second. The girl's mother covered her mouth in shock, tears streaming down her face. Members of the audience shook their heads, some murmuring angrily. The officer's defense attorney shifted uncomfortably in his seat, knowing there was no way to spin what everyone was seeing. The video continued, showing the officers rifling through her car without cause, looking for anything they could use against her. They found nothing, yet proceeded to arrest her on vague charges of resisting. The footage ended with the girl sitting alone in the back seat, her face a mix of fear and confusion. When the video stopped, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. It was broken only by the father's voice as he turned to the jury. "This is how my daughter was treated. Not because she broke any laws, but because of the color of her skin." The prosecutor, sensing the gravity of the moment, stood up and addressed the jury. "The evidence speaks for itself. These officers abused their authority, not out of necessity, but out of bias. They saw a young black girl and decided she was guilty before she said a single word." But the climax didn't end there. The defense attorney, desperate to salvage the situation, called the officers to the stand. Their earlier confidence was gone, replaced by visible unease. When questioned, the first officer tried to justify his actions, claiming he felt threatened by the girl's behavior. But the prosecutor wasn't having it. Threatened? By a 15-year-old girl sitting in her car with her hands on the wheel? Is that your definition of a threat? The officer stammered, his explanation growing more implausible by the second. The second officer fared no better, his attempt to shift blame only digging them deeper into a hole. "We were following protocol," he claimed, but the prosecutor quickly dismantled that argument, pointing out the inconsistencies between their actions and department guidelines. The turning point came when the father presented a final piece of evidence, a report detailing the officer's history of complaints. Both had multiple accusations of misconduct, most involving racial profiling. Though none had led to disciplinary action, the pattern was undeniable. "This isn't an isolated incident," the father said, his voice rising with emotion. "These men have been doing this for years, and no one has held them accountable. But today, that changes." The courtroom erupted into whispers as the jury exchanged glances. The weight of the evidence was overwhelming, and the officer's defense crumbled before their eyes. In the gallery, the girl sat between her mother and siblings, her hands clenched tightly together. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt a glimmer of hope. The prosecutor delivered his closing argument, urging the jury to consider the facts and the undeniable prejudice that fueled the officers' actions. "This isn't just about two officers," he said. "It's about sending a message that justice will not turn a blind eye to abuse and discrimination." When the jury left to deliberate, the tension in the room was palpable. The officers sat silently, their faces pale, as the weight of their actions finally seemed to hit them. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. The officers were found guilty of misconduct, abuse of power, and falsifying their reports. The judge's sentencing included not only job termination, but also charges that could lead to prison time. For the young girl and her family, it was a bittersweet victory. The trauma of what had happened couldn't be undone, but the truth had prevailed, and justice had been served. As they left the courtroom, The girl's father placed a hand on her shoulder. "This fight wasn't just for you," he said softly. "It was for everyone who's ever been silenced. And today, we made sure they were heard." The courtroom verdict was clear. Justice had finally been served. The two officers were held accountable for their actions, facing termination and charges that could lead to prison time. For the young girl and her family, it was a bittersweet victory. While the trauma of the event would never fully fade, the truth had prevailed, sending a powerful message about standing up against injustice. This case wasn't just about one girl. It was a turning point in the fight for equality and accountability. Subscribe for more stories that expose the truth and keep watching to see the fight against injustice.